has a really powerful feature where you can use resources to essentially display information on the front end. This is really useful for both user um, cases where we have inertia used or if we're using an API. So an example, for example, I could give is for my website where I have an article resource. In here we have a bunch of data we're passing through, but first and foremost, let's look at how we can actually display this. So on my website, I'm using an article resource here where we're eager loading it in. And we're essentially displaying it with an article resource. Recommended articles here using an article card resource, which is a collection because this is multiple, in this case, articles. And then we have, just in this case, a regular resource where we're just having a single object pass through. Now the way we know this is singular is because this is using the make function and not making a collection. So in this case, for example, we have these two pass through to inertia. So if we take a look at the article resource, in here we have a title pass through, the content, and we have the excerpt, the slug, the publish time, table of contents, categories, all these sort of things. And then you can see that we can essentially go in to this article resource and use the category resource and then have this in here. So now this essentially will just pass through a bunch of an array here with all this data available if available, and then it will pass data again from a category resource with a collection of categories which we retrieved from eager loading the relationship. We can then get all of the category resource in here. We can get the user was made by, the public user resource. We can get the article card resource in here where we, for example, also have a public user resource where we retrieve the avatar URL. So essentially, you can use article resources and resources in general really easily to display and retrieve data. So to show you an example of what we could do here is, if I go in here, we can go in and say PHP artisan make resource. Let's call this test resource. And if we go ahead now, we can take a look at in here and say test. Don't just say test resource. In this case, collection. And let's just put through recommended for now. We can go ahead and import this class. In this case, you can see we are by default just returning the array of everything in it. But let's say you wanted to hide the ID for this test case here. So you just don't pass the ID through now. Then it won't show at all. You won't be able to retrieve that on the front end. Or let's say, you don't want to pass through the password of a user. You don't want to have that accessible for the public. So you have a public user resource here where you don't pass through anything like a password. And then you have something where, for example, you have a user resource where you pass through all the information relevant. You still don't pass through the password because we don't need to display that on the front end. But we do pass through more sensitive information, and such as information as two-factor enabled. So in here we can essentially just retrieve data from this, and let's say for example name. So imagine we pass through the article here with something here. We could get the name, and it just retrieves it from the model instance. And that's the very basic of it. But there's more we can go ahead and do. Not only can we just retrieve this data in here, we can also use this resource super easily to pass through other custom data that, may just be retrieved from an enum or the like. So that's essentially the very basic of resources. In this case, if you wanted to display the resource in inertia, all we do is, just like we normally do, we go into our pages here, for example, and in the home page you can see we have featured articles pass through to the home page in this case, and that's retrieved by passing through a resource again, which in this case comes from the home controller, and we just get featured articles here. So that's all for this video. I hope you've learned something on how to use Laravel resources. It's a really neat way to tidy up the application, and what it works really well with is the fact that you can go ahead and avoid having to pass through and manipulate arrays using for each statements and collections sometimes, and instead just use the resource. It doesn't always work, and sometimes you do have to use collections and map through them and change some values in there, but this is a neat way to avoid it. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.